Good afternoon. This is JC, St. Louis's oldest living hippie, and I want to bring you a video to watch. And the title is Trump Told Me 2026. It's how terribly ignorant millions of voters are, and they just vote the way that Trump tells them. It should scare the holy hell out of you. And if you're one of the people who votes the way Trump told you, it should open your eyes.
Out what the message is there, Bill. I mean, don't want anyone to violate their core principles, but also stay in line.
Yeah, I think the message is shut up and stay in line, and for all the talk about principles is very nice. You can't carve out your own lane. You're elected by the voters. You take an oath to the Constitution. You don't work for the president, but you can't really cross him. And Mike Johnson's pretending, well, he can't cross his colleagues, but of course Mike Johnson is doing exactly what the president wants. Massey crossed Trump on Epstein. Let's not forget the issue that Trump really turned against Massey on. It was Epstein. And now the voters in his district responded to Trump's wishes. But look, let's not forget the voters in Georgia. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who is bravely a conservative Republican conservative down the board, down the line, but he stood up to Trump courageously and correctly in 2020 when Trump tried to order him to flip 11,000, whatever it was, 870 votes. Remember that? And his deputy, actually, Jeffrey Sperling, also stood up to Trump. They both got crushed in the primaries they were running in this last night. So the voters, from my point of view, unfortunately, I got to say the Republican voters are with Trump. Maybe it hurts. I hope Trump's disapproval hurts the Republican Party, which is now so tied so closely to him in the general election in November. But no, so I do think it could hurt some. But some of these seats are, we'll see. I think people shouldn't count those chickens before they hatch.
Well, Michael, I want your take on that. Bring us to Kentucky. Are the voters squarely with Trump? How is his grip on the party right now going down with being processed by people there?
Yeah, Antonia, it's extremely strong. I mean, President Trump was the central reason why so many voters I had spoken to said that they were sticking with Gallrein instead of Thomas Massie. I was at a polling place yesterday here in Hebron, Kentucky, and I was asking a number of voters, why are you supporting Ed Gallrein? And they said, well, it's because I don't support Thomas Massie. I don't like what he's done. I don't like the votes he's taken. My next question was, okay, which vote was most problematic for you? What drew the most criticism from you? And these voters, a number of them couldn't name anything. In fact, I had heard from one voter who said they didn't like that Thomas Massie supported Trump's impeachment. That's not true. Thomas Massie didn't vote to impeach President Trump. So it just showed that at the end of the day, regardless of any policy disputes that Gallrein had with Thomas Massie or Massie had with President Trump, it didn't matter. What it all came back to was the fact that Gallrein was backed by President Trump. Take a listen to some of the voters I had spoken to. Again, these are Gallrein voters making it very clear the reason why they were with him was because of Donald Trump.
I don't like his personality at all. But that's who Trump told me to vote for, so that's what I'm doing.
I'm not just, all whatever Trump says kind of person, but, usually what his way of thinking is my way of thinking.
So, Antonia, Thomas Massie tried to run a policy-based campaign here, saying he wanted to bring down deficits, keep the U.S. out of foreign entanglements and foreign wars. Even if some of these Republican voters here in this district agreed with those positions, it just wouldn't have been enough because they are so squarely aligned with President Trump. Now, in terms of what happens next for Thomas Massie, he told me last night during an interview at his election night HQ that he is very much so would be open to another political campaign in the future. In that room where he was delivering that post-election speech, there were chants of president coming from the crowd. And then there was even one supporter who had changed where it said Congress on a poster to change it to say president. So certainly will be interesting to see what Thomas Massie's next act is. I asked him if December will be the last that we hear and see from him. He said, I doubt it.
Michael, can I ask you a quick follow-up there? When you were speaking to voters and they said inaccurate things like Massie had voted to impeach President Trump, which he had not. When you informed them of the facts, did that seem to shift their thoughts at all, change their behavior, or even just make them reflect on some of the messaging they might have heard throughout the campaign?
It sort of left them at a loss for words. There was that one woman who I had spoken to who mentioned impeachment. I said, Thomas Massie didn't support President Trump's impeachment. Other than that, what ones of his policy decisions, policy proposals, stances, or votes upset you the most? And she was at a loss for words. She didn't have an answer. And then I said, well, did President Trump's endorsement weigh heavily on your decision? That was where she was emphatic, where she said, yes, I agree with the president. I take my cues from the president. That's why it was so clear that Thomas Massie thought that he could win this on a policy-based campaign. I spoke to him the day before the election, and he told me the difference between him and Bill Cassidy and those Indiana state senators were the fact that 90% of the time he votes with Trump. In the 10% he doesn't, it's because he's aligning with his constituents rather than President Trump. Well, it seems to be that based on the results last night, that it doesn't matter if the constituents agree with that policy stance. What matters is that they like President Trump. And again, it seems to be the biggest driver of their votes here in Kentucky.
Yeah, incredible reporting, Michael. That's all very striking. Susan, there's also a new Associated Press poll out showing Trump's approval rating on the economy is just 37%. Among Republicans, it's down 16 points since February to 63%. I'm curious to what extent you think our sort of gerrymandered political structure and reality right now is responsible for this dynamic where the polling could not be more clear about voters.
That's enough for now. I'm sorry. I meant to just do a little bit of this video, but I became enthralled with what they were saying. So there you go. These people are so stupid, such morons, that they do what Trump tells them to do, and they don't even know why. We live in a sick country, a sick country full of morons and idiots. 65% of the people can't read above a 5th, 6th grade level. That tells you a whole lot right there. This is JC, St. Louis is Always Living Hippie, saying, I hope you listen to this and watch this video to the end. Fuck you, Donald Trump, and fuck all the people you endorse, and everybody else, Poxmore Jack.